On the account of Europe preparing to go to war against Russia, it does seem completely insane. They're not that delusional to think that we can conquer Russia. What they want is continued bloodshed, the two sides continuing to weaken one another, to hope that amidst the chaos, they can then plunder and pillage Russia.
The way that this Anglo-American octopus, the blob, intelligence operation and financial integration with finance, the only hope it has to stay in business is through war.
The market's verdict is that Britain really is the weak link in the Western world. It means pretty much that Britain is going in the direction of the Weimar Republic in Germany.
The support for Israel has collapsed in the United States. Even Trump acknowledged that the other day in an interview.
So it turns out that apparently the British establishment is planning to use Muslim jihadis throughout the world as their proxy military force.
Putin and Xi may be powerful, but they're not powerful enough to sink the dollar anywhere near what Wall Street and the City of London can do. The idea of European or Eurasian integration has always been the great fear that's driven British geopolitics.
They're investing incredible amounts of money into completely idiotic, nonsensical projects, like building industrial facilities to capture carbon from the atmosphere and bury it underground.
It's like Jonathan Swift on Gulliver's Island, trying to capture sunbeams from cucumbers to light the churches.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
You can keep up with Alex Krainer's extraordinary analysis and writing at his Substack, and also make money using his trend-following strategy. To find out more, go to bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK. bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK. Keep up with Harley Schlanger's insightful analysis on macro politics at larouche.org. Link in the description below. If you're in the UK, or actually anywhere, get a VPN if you want to be able to access all sorts of perspectives. It's Friday, the 5th of September. 7:30 p.m. UK time, and I am joined by Harley Schlanger and Alex Krainer, who are extraordinary analysts and commentators. I've learned loads from both of them. I'll have links to Harley's work and Alex's work in the description below. We do this once a month, and I'm really, really grateful to you both. Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you, Rich. Good to join you again today.
Yes. I always look forward to it.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they? They're really, really good. Okay, so Harley, you mentioned before we started recording that there's a lot of stuff going on, right? There is a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to keep up. But you said we could have the French government collapsing in a matter of weeks.
1 week, less than a week.
Oh yeah,
wow.
They got the vote on September the 8th, right?
That's right. The no confidence vote. And there is no confidence in the government. Whether they get the vote through or not, we'll see. But there's a lot of turmoil. And of course, in the midst of this, Macron is doing his Superman routine with announcing that 26 nations of Europe are prepared to fight for freedom and democracy in Ukraine. And I'm wondering, if they're that interested in freedom and democracy in Ukraine, why they don't tell Zelensky to hold an election.
Yeah. or to unban the Russian language and to stop the persecution of the Eastern Orthodox Church.
And to stop the opposition, the crushing of opposition parties and press.
Yes. Yes.
So when you say a lot, when I said a lot going on, we just saw a series of extraordinary conferences in Asia.
Okay.
Tianjin, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
We'll come to those. I just want to stick with France, right? Because what I've read about it is one of the options that Macron has is declaring a state of emergency, something like that, and then remaining in power. But that's not going to go down well with the French populace at all.
What I can tell you is that in the military, there's a lot of concern, a lot of anger. Here you are putting forward the idea that France is going to take over the defense of Europe or depend on a British nuclear umbrella at the time in which the government is collapsing. And Macron is having a great deal of difficulty with his Prime Minister Bayrou to pull together a budget. The farm sector is in chaos. There's a great deal of anger. The fuel prices are starting to climb in France now, which previously was somewhat protected from that. So there's just an ongoing drop in popularity for Macron. The political establishment in France, as in England, as in Germany, is about 25% or less in the polls. And to put yourself forward as an example of a brilliant democracy when less than 1 in 4 people support the government and the government is about to fall, Macron is limited. He could accept the resignation of the prime minister who said he's not going to resign. If the vote goes through, then Macron has limited options. He can call for new elections. And one of the things that the French press is saying is that he may declare a state of emergency and do a Zelensky, be the president without a legal mandate. So that's the story of what's going on in France. And as I say, most important thing is that the military is quite up in arms over whether they're actually going to be putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, as Macron has been emphasizing. And the French retired military is very vocal in saying there's no way France is prepared for a war with Russia.
Yes, absolutely. Alex, any comments on France?
No, I actually haven't been paying much attention to France because I've been in Croatia for the last month. But none of this surprises me very much because I've been, getting information from people in France that I know who are close to the military circles, who have been telling me that the military is expecting this crisis to unravel through a civil war, and that they were actually preparing for it. So who knows what might go down? But this sounds like it's we're getting there, and then the events going on in Britain are showing.
We'll come to Britain, Alex. We'll come to Britain. I want to stick with France because the other thing, just we'll do discrete chunks. Otherwise, we'll be traveling all over the world, zigzagging, right? The other thing that's going on with France is its really bad economic state, high unemployment, massive amounts of migrants, the bond market, and the debt to GDP, which hopefully, Alex, you'll know a bit more about than I will as I stumble through this. But there's talk of France may need an IMF bailout.
Yes. Yes, France might need an IMF bailout. Britain might need an IMF bailout. I don't know if Germany might need an IMF bailout, but it can't be far from that either. And one thing that IMF bailouts are famous for is that it never leads to an economic recovery.
Never works.
It doesn't work. It never leads to increased standard of living. It doesn't. They impose structural adjustments, meaning the country is pressured to sell off its infrastructure, its state-owned enterprises, to cut all kinds of benefits to the people. So pensions, healthcare, education, all of this needs to be cut to the bare bones. Basically, what IMF's structural adjustments do is they maximize the amount of money that can go to servicing the debts, the foreign debts, and they minimize the amount of money that the government can spend domestically on, social programs and infrastructure and all of these things. So it generally leads to governments and countries falling to third world status. And I don't know of a single case of any country going by the IMF instructions to restructure their economy that came out on the other end more competitive, more prosperous, more wealthier. So if Western European countries are going in that direction, that's just more evidence that they are failing, that they're failed systems.
Yep.
And just to add to that, in terms of France, France has committed itself to a massive increase in spending for defense and the military, as have most of the countries of Europe. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, was bragging about how the European governments are showing the mettle, their courage by preparing for war. And then you talk to the people in the military, and they just, they're, what's wrong with these guys? The whole key to the European defense is getting money from the European Union in bond sales to buy weapons from the United States. And that's not a very good strategy.
Well, yeah, not only that, but the weapons bought from the United States are not exactly the best weapons you can buy, and the United States has technologies that can condition. You might not be able to use those weapons because they depend on, satellite data, codes, stuff that whether you are able to fire the weapon or not in a given set of circumstances depends on the vendor. And then when you call the vendor and say like, hey, we have to shoot at our enemies, and they might say, well, no, we don't agree, it's complicated. So then what do you have? You have these weapons that serve no purpose. I mean, the Europeans are so pathetically lost in this historical moment that even listening to people like Kaya Kallas, like Friedrich Merz, Macron, all of these people, Ursula von der Leyen, good Lord, it's extremely painful, and it's embarrassing. And I don't know what Kaya Kallas's problem is. She must have some kind of a mental problem. But the statements she make, I would expect more from a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
Even even at the level of platitudes, which is all she does, I would expect more from a high school student, and she's just talking complete and total nonsense. It's surreal. Sometimes I think like, this has got to be AI. Come on, nobody's this dumb. But actually, it looks like she really is.
The latest example of this is the von der Leyen's trip to Bulgaria, where they insisted that the Russians were jamming the radar and trying to bring the plane down. And the Bulgarian government said, where are you coming up with this? There's no evidence of this at all. And von der Leyen's reception from Bulgaria was not very favorable.
Yes.
And so we're now seeing a shift going on in the Czech Republic moving toward a let's just say anti-Ukrainian war. You have the Poles questioning continued support for Ukraine. So Europe itself is not as solid as you would think if you read Le Monde or the Daily Telegraph.
Well, Harley, I think it's a lot worse than that, because we have Poland demanding World War II reparations from Germany in the amount of $1.3 trillion, which is an absolutely massive amount of money. And it wasn't maybe a year or two ago that they actually filed an official diplomatic note to the Germans saying, here, this is what you owe us. So this looks like Poland actually antagonizing Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Greece and Turkey, which are both members of NATO, actually preparing for war, one against the other.
Okay.
And the relations between Italy and France are not exactly warm either. And so and then not to mention the relations between Hungary and Brussels, between the mothership and the Hungarians, and then Brussels and Slovakia as well. So it looks like it's all going the way of Soviet Union. And I think that at some point we're going to have a dissolution like we did of the Soviet Union. They might say, okay, it's not working. European Union is no more.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens on a team. When a team is losing, it starts fracturing.
Yes, exactly. They start mutual recriminations, accusations.
Arguing.
Just look at the Ukrainians striking at the pipeline, supplying energy to Slovakia and Hungary, and it seems that they're doing it in coordination with Brussels, and Zelensky talking about it openly.
Well, and this is also characteristic of a breakdown where you have a flight forward mentality. The people who are pushing the failed policies, instead of acknowledging that they're making a mistake, instead of recognizing there's no way to win this war, they double down.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing from Ukraine. That's what we're seeing from NATO. And then meanwhile, complicating the whole thing is a relationship with Trump in the United States, where from one day to the next, it's not quite clear what Trump intends to do, what he's going to do. But it is clear he's not betting on Europe.
Yeah.
I saw something on X today. It was Alex Jones talking about how Trump has said he's going to put troops in Poland. It was just a heading that I saw. I don't know if you know anything about that, but I can't get my head around that. And I wonder if that's another of, the sort of things that Trump says on a Thursday, as Tom Luongo says. He says it on a Thursday, right? Twists people's heads. Their heads explode, right? And then you
This is a
find out
bad
actually
weekend.
there was something else. Ali, I'm not sure if I said this in a video with you, but I finally got, I think Trump is like Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali in his fight with his
The
first,
rope-a-dope?
no, Sonny Liston. His first
Okay.
fight with Sonny
First
Liston.
fight.
Yeah. He Muhammad Ali played like he was crazy. He acted like he was crazy. And that upset Sonny Liston and lost his composure because apparently he was scared of crazy people. and it's like, okay, well, I can see Trump doing that. People really, really do underestimate him. Just get contaminated by their hostility towards him. Okay, now you've mentioned many, many countries, both of you, and I would like us to travel discreetly through Europe and then perhaps the US and the rest of the world, right? So next to France, to the west of France, are these set of islands. And there's Britain, which is a made-up place. And then also Ireland. I did a conversation with Ian Burlingame and Ivor Cummins this week. I just recorded it a few days ago about what's happening in England and in Ireland. But Alex, you were talking about the British government collapsing.
Yes.
You want to talk about what's going on in Britain?
I don't know what's going on in Britain, other than, like what I see is the social part of the equation. I see that the government is practically, the part that I don't know is the fiscal position of the British government, because I don't believe that the information that they share, that they broadcast, that you can find on the official government websites, I don't believe that information is true. So, they say like, oh my God, the debt to GDP ratio has reached 100%. I'm thinking like, I would bet anything that it's a lot higher than that. Apparently, their tax receipts from North Sea oil production have collapsed. Very substantially below what was expected. Even they're investing incredible amounts of money into completely idiotic, nonsensical projects, like building industrial facilities to capture carbon from the atmosphere and bury it underground.
You mean planting trees, right?
No, I mean really like multi-billion-dollar factories.
Like Jonathan Swift on Gulliver's Island, trying to capture sunbeams from cucumbers to light the churches.
Yes. That's that level. And then they seem to be still completely committed to all these net zero. Well, that's capturing carbon is part of that, but the other parts of it is ending air travel, shutting down airports, covering the countryside with solar panels. They seem to be repressing the ordinary people. There's this duality where they're flooding the financial system with money, but they're imposing very, very harsh austerity on the ordinary working people and on small and medium-sized businesses, family businesses, small companies. So the unemployment is rising, the guilt, which is one of the things I look at, because let's say you can't cheat that. When you look at the price of the guilt and you compare it to the US 10-year treasury notes or with the German Bund, you said that the gilt is the most under pressure, meaning that the market's verdict is that Britain really is the weak link in the Western world. So, if you go by the official statistics, you could kind of reach the conclusion that, so this is a country possibly on the verge of recession. Deficits are kind of high and growing. Debt to GDP, 100%, not great, but hardly anything to write home about. It's like there's a lot of countries that on paper look like they're in a lot worse shape. So Britain almost looks like, oh well, it's not great, but it's not that bad either. But I think it is really bad. So that's the part that we don't know because it's hidden. Example, when Keir Starmer came to the Downing Street, when he became prime minister, he came straight out and said, like, oh my God, we looked at the books and we discovered a 22 billion pound black hole in the country's finances. And so that was supposed to be this shocking moment, like, oh my God, 22 billion pound black hole. Well, that same Keir Starmer was saying that the black hole is 67 billion pounds when he was in opposition. And then he corrected himself saying, like, no, sorry, not 67, 76 billion pound black hole. And so, that's not a small difference, that 3 times the size, so he was meaning to, shock the people into being prepared for painful cuts with the 22 billion announcement, but he himself knew that it was 76 billion in reality. Who knows? By now it could be worse because things have not gone better. All the government programs that they've, they had this October 30th budget with very ambitious government programs, increased spending. They were relying on financing their programs from the private investment markets. That's not going so well either. And so last summer, the Bank of England had to step in and start to participate directly in the repo markets. What does that tell you? That tells you that at least one of the big 5 banks is actually failed. At least one. And so it looks like if it weren't for the Bank of England's perpetual infinite quantitative easing, that Britain would already be in bankruptcy. And so we don't know these things. But I think that the situation is bad, that it's very serious, and that it is probably going to something's going to happen pretty soon, because the British gilt, something that I follow every day, now they had 2 days uptick because on Wednesday they fell to practically the lowest number since 1998. There was a moment in the beginning of the year when they fell a bit lower, but you can usually take the market reaction of just a couple of days as an anomaly. You can ignore it. Where we are now is, the highest. The interest rates are the highest they have been since 1998, and the government debt is only rising. Their ability to finance it is weaker and weaker and weaker, and the capital markets are not obliging. So you're left with one thing and one thing only, and that's the central bank printing presses. And that means pretty much that Britain is going in the direction of the Weimar Republic in Germany, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela, all of these. It's a very typical syndrome, and you can't predict how fast things are going to unravel, but you can pretty much predict that you're going to have accelerating inflation, that the currency is going to collapse, and that the interest rates are going to spike. Probably the stock markets are going to go up, but usually in these circumstances, maybe the stock market goes up tenfold, but the loss of purchasing power of the currency outstrips it, and by a lot. So people end up wiped out anyhow. Yep. And then you have to start from a blank slate. Then you have a completely devastated country, economy in a depression, people deeply demoralized and disoriented and confused. And then you might actually need help from abroad.
The IMF. Let's talk of that. Alex, if I can bring Harley in. Thank you, Alex. Harley, any comments on Britain that I may say a few things?
Well, the one thing that caught my attention, Alex, was when you brought up the problems with the repo markets, because that's what hit the United States in 2019, 2020. Correct. When it's the repurchasing, that when banks have to cover their overnight demands and they don't have the money, so they put up some kind of collateral to borrow. And usually it's a group of banks that provide the money. But when the banks no longer have the money to do it, and the central bank has to step in, which is what the Fed did, this was about the estimates are between 17 and $21 trillion were put in by the Fed to cover the problems in the repo markets in the period right around 2020 in the United States. Now, the United States can do that because as long as the dollar remains the central currency, it can attract money from elsewhere by raising interest rates or by offering other kinds of inducements. But a country like the United Kingdom has lost that capability. And then on top of that, you have the problems in the healthcare system, the National Health Service. You have problems in infrastructure. And instead of addressing those areas of infrastructure, which will have an impact on the real physical economy, they're doing what you're talking about, these funny plans for solar panels and carbon capture, which is a detraction from the real economy.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's so much trouble. And it's not just Britain. The same thing's going on in the United States, but the United States, because of the size, is able to kick the can down the road, at least for a certain period of time. But the road, they're getting near the end of the road for that.
Well, United States can import and purchase things for dollars. They can print money and they can get real products. They can get oil, they can get gas, they can get foodstuffs, they can get all kinds of stuff. British pound, not so much. The British have to buy dollars to buy imports, and if the pound is tanking, then you're Harley. Just one question. You said between 17 and how many $1 trillion was estimated? 21. That was the estimate. Staggering. That's absolutely staggering.
And that was a figure that Jamie Dimon mentioned in one of the congressional testimonies. Because the Congress was saying, well, what's the big deal with the repo markets? And he said, well, if you can't get money from the banks, and the banks, by the way, usually like the repo markets because they can charge high interest rates for the overnight to cover the overnight demands. So if they're not able to do that, that just shows you the extent to which the system is running out of room.
Yeah. Well, if I can just add a little bit of color to what else is going on in the UK today, the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner resigned. This was over. She has a constituency up in Northern England. That's where she's an MP. She works, so she has accommodation there, and she works in London, and she has an official residence in London. And then she bought a flat in Brighton and Hove, which she then claimed was her main residence, so she wouldn't have to pay stamp duty on it. And thus she saved herself £40,000. And apparently there was an injunction to prevent people talking about this, media talking about this, but that injunction expired, so it all came out. And today she resigned, and now we have the incredibly sharp, intelligent, capable Deputy Prime Minister in the persona of David Lammy, who Medvedev tweeted out and said is an idiot. David Lammy is an English idiot.
Well, he is kind of, no?
He is, right? But you know, in a way, this is kind of refreshing because it means that the globalists, they really are scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're so exhausted, their talent pool, that, you know, they're having to use people like Merz and von der Leyen and Starmer, for goodness sake, and now Lammy. And now, Alex, a few months ago, you and I did a video with Lauren, iCrypto, and one of the things she talked about was around about this period.
Yes. How interesting.
Starmer is going to be in big trouble. And she said it could lead to his resignation. And she said it was tied to what's happening on September the 7th, which, Harley, is a solar eclipse and also a full moon. So we shall see how this plays out. I'm just curious to see how it plays out. But this will have repercussions because the Labour Party is incredibly unpopular. And then there's the stuff that's going on, how the imperial elites are stoking conflict between Muslims and native English people. That, you know, English people are being arrested for raising their flags. That's really, really going to piss people off. And yet Pakistanis can, you know, put up Pakistani flags. People can put up Palestinian flags, not an issue. You know, there was an incident a few days ago, I saw it on X, where the police were actually questioning some school kids who had little flags, taking their details. So it is, and what that does, it's part of I think, an assault on nationality and culture. You've got to make being patriotic, you've got to make it undesirable.
Well, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to add something to that because I think it's extremely interesting. Namely, You know what I found out the other day? That I think something like 85% of all the refugees in the world are Muslims. So isn't that interesting? That's kind of random. And then I found out that the strange thing that the Great Britain kind of have all these they have all these imperial designs and ambitions. I'm sorry, I'm looking to the side because I'm looking for a certain note that but they have no military with which to fulfill their
imperial ambitions.
Their imperial ambitions. So it turns out that apparently the British establishment is planning to use Muslim jihadis throughout the world as their proxy military force.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the thesis of a woman. I'm not finding the exact note. Who's an Orientalist, an academic, but she came to the conclusion that the British are actually looking to control. So her name is Karin Gevorgian, expert Orientalist, and he said that the control of virtually all radical Islamists in the world through secret intelligence assets like Turkey and Pakistan, and that this is what they're wielding around the world in order to gain control and try to reach their colonialist, imperialistic objectives.
Let me give you a name that's directly involved in that, which is Jonathan Powell.
Yes,
who's
Jonathan
the
Powell,
National Security Advisor to Starmer, former National Security Advisor to Blair.
Tony Blair, yes.
And Vanessa Beeley, the excellent reporter from Syria, who's now in hiding in Lebanon, reported that Powell has been spending enormous amounts of time in Syria coordinating the so-called shift of the jihadis from head choppers to head choppers in three-piece suits. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that they are. And also, who else do they work with? The Israelis.
Yes.
Yeah, which is what, like, ISIS has never attacked Israel, which I always found rather curious.
Yeah, they never
just
even.
As long as we're talking about the race to the bottom, if I may say something about Germany quickly.
Yeah, please, Harley.
What we're seeing is the complete collapse of Merz's support. The party is now down to about 21 or 22%. They claim Merz has 27% support. But what he's engaged in is this tough talking about Russia, including the question of, have the Taurus missiles actually already been moved to Ukraine? There's a question mark about that. Meanwhile, you have the Social Democrats at about 14%, an all-time low. The Greens fell another point or two in the polls, down to 10%. And the Alternative for Deutschland is the one party that keeps growing. And then you have this crazy thing in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, where 4 candidates of the AfD died in a period leading up to the coming election.
I've heard 7.
Seven, well, apparently 7.
That includes the 3 who are the second candidates. So the 4 who are the primary candidates, and then 3 more. Very unusual. And the German press is doing real twisting somersaults to try and explain that this is not an anomaly.
Well, apparently, statistically, this is next to impossible.
Yeah.
And somebody did a search on AI. Were there any deaths reported from other parties? And there have been none. So all of the deaths are AfD candidates. Yeah. People don't run for office in their poor state of health. So generally, these are healthy people. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of hard work to sustain the pressure of an election campaign. And then, if somebody is sickly and low energy, they generally don't get votes. So they don't, the party wouldn't put them forward. So presumably these would all be people in good state of health. And so that 7 of them drop dead in the space of 2 weeks is just staggering. I don't know how you explain that away, but It's truly shocking because it reminds of 1920s and
You mentioned
1930s.
Weimar. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And also interesting in this is that the polls are showing that as the AfD is rising, that the growth is now in Western Germany. North Rhine-Westphalia is a very populated Western state where the AfD until 2022 was at about 4%. In 2024, it went up to 16%, and now it's growing larger. In Eastern Germany, the AfD in some states is 40 to 45%. And this is with the government doing everything they can to discourage people from even considering thinking about the AfD. So, and meanwhile, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats just sent two of their top people to Kiev to pledge a British-style eternal alliance with Ukraine. Now, when you talk about the economy, in Germany, the auto sector is staggering. It's just reeling from losses. The machine shops, which are the key to it, the engineering technology, the small and medium-sized enterprises are going out of business. And they're going out of business partly because they can't get credit. And I can tell you also the real estate sector, which for a period of time...
Why can't they get credit?
Because the money is allocated toward the defense sector right now.
Right.
And Germany, even though it did get rid of the debt block, that the percentage that limited the debt, it still is a problem because the money is going into military. They're having problems recruiting. They want to expand the Bundeswehr, the German army. They can't recruit anyone. They go to high school graduations and bring drones and video games to try and get people to sign up to go into the army. And they're not replacing the numbers of people who are leaving. So you have a breakdown across the board, which is not being addressed, and it's beginning to affect the German people. The Germans have this, it's not quite the I'm all right, Jack mentality of the British, but they try to keep an even keel, and there's not a lot of passionate discussion about politics. That's changing, and we're starting to see large demonstrations, both for and against various issues, and it's a polarized situation. And in Germany, if you are in Berlin and you go out and demonstrate with a Palestinian flag, you are taken in immediately into custody, and it could be 72 hours of questioning before you're released.
Wow. Okay, a question then. There's one thing for the European nations when they're strong, when their manufacturing base is effective and working, when their economies are in good shape, when their people are fortified and united to then go and wage war. But these countries are like Britain, France, Germany. They're like jalopies. They're falling apart. And they're going to go and take on the mighty Russian military machine? Why? What could be? I mean, please, Alex, Harley, can they not see this? Why are they doing this? It will lead to failure, rack and ruin.
Well, let me throw out something, and then I'm sure Alex has something quite interesting on this. This is where we go to what just happened in Asia with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, the Beijing military march to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the victory over the Japanese. What's happening is you're having an integrated economy in Eurasia. And what Putin and Xi and now Modi, the fact that Modi appeared in Tianjin with Putin and Xi caused panic in Britain. Because why? Well, this is Alfred Mackinder's spinning in his grave. The idea of European or Eurasian integration has always been the great fear that's driven British geopolitics. And the idea of losing markets and the idea of losing control over the currency and the trade, that's becoming a real factor. So it's not just the decline of the European economies, but the rise of the Eurasian economies. And Xi said, we're ushering in a new era. Putin said, this is the beginning of prosperity for all humanity. And what is interesting is the Western press is saying this is an attack on the dollar, an attack on the US, an attack on the West. Actually, it's not. They're all saying we want the West to be part of this. And that somehow is missed in the media. And I know Alex, from his following of developments around the BRICS, can say a lot more about it. But that the idea that this is somehow an attempt to sink the dollar, Putin and Xi may be powerful, but they're not powerful enough to sink the dollar anywhere near what Wall Street and the City of London can do.
Thank you, Holly. Alex?
Okay, so on the account of Europe preparing to go to war against Russia, it does seem completely insane, but it doesn't matter, because the people who are trying to orchestrate this war, which would be pretty much the same networks of power that orchestrated the First and the Second World Wars, they don't really, they're not that delusional to think that we can, march to Moscow and conquer Russia. What they want is continued bloodshed, continued the two sides continuing to weaken one another, and then to hope that amidst the chaos they can orchestrate a regime change in Moscow, that they can slip in some kind of a Vladimir Zelensky into Kiev, and that they can then plunder and pillage Russia as they did during the 1990s, and that they can ultimately lead Russia to disintegration as they did in the 1990s. They came very, very close to succeeding. And so, if they have to if they had to sacrifice Ukraine to achieve that goal, not a problem. 1.7 million Ukrainian men, not a problem at all. If they need to sacrifice Europe for that objective, that's not a problem either. We're talking about an estimated 75 to 90 trillion dollars worth of natural resource wealth. We're talking about 140, 150 million strong workforce, which is the most highly educated workforce in the world. And so that could all be the collateral of the Western banking systems. And it would be a shame if as Lindsey Graham says, that we don't want to give that to Putin. So that's what the fight is about. And then it's not only Russia and Russian natural resources, but they want control of the whole Eurasian landmass.
Yeah.
And so they need to dismember Russia, and then to use Russia's military might to, in the same way that they use Ukraine's military might against Russia, they will then use Russia's military might against China. Yeah. And then, they balkanize everybody, the whole continent. They do the same to Iran. And that's their dream. That's their objective. They can perpetuate their century of war, 2 centuries of war, everybody against everybody. Everybody needs to buy weapons from them to be able to fight their neighbors. Everybody needs to borrow money from them in order to be able to sustain the government and the society and the military. And so, they are in charge. They are in charge everywhere. They control everyone. And they do exactly as the British have done for 200 years. They support one side against the other, but that they also covertly support the other side. And then when country A becomes more powerful than country B, then they make friendly overtures to country B in order to weaken the country A. And then when they've accomplished that, then they it's wash, rinse, repeat. Well, the problem now is that they were able to do this in the 19th century. They were able to do this to a large extent in the 20th century. But I think that people are understanding what the game is, and they're not taking the bait. They're not falling into their provocations. The wars that they tried to trigger between India and Pakistan, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, between Azerbaijan and Iran, Azerbaijan antagonizing Iran and then antagonizing Russia at the same time, that didn't get very far. the provocations, the attempts to force Georgia to open the second front against Russia, that didn't work out either. Coups in Kazakhstan, in Turkey, in I think Kyrgyzstan as well, those failed as well. And so their playbook isn't working out quite as well as it once did.
And
the line they have is that Russia is isolated.
Yes.
And yet, if you look at this Eastern or Eurasian Economic Forum, there were, I think, 70 nations represented. Russia announced 3,800 new projects underway in Eastern Russia and the Arctic for $148 billion, which include many nations, including U.S. firms, including for the first time Indonesia, Malaysia. It's really quite a staggering picture. And then you think about the strategic metals and mineral wealth in that area. And then you add one other factor, which is that they had hoped they could use the cheap labor in China back from the early period of the World Trade Organization and the integration of China into the Western economy. That's over. The Chinese have now really upgraded their internal situation. They've built a middle class that's bigger than the entire population of the United States. And so, in that sense, when Putin says it's a new era, it is. Now, when will people in the West figure out that it would be a costly mistake to try and claw it back? When in fact, there are people starting to say, well, we have technologies. In fact, Putin was talking about doing some deals with Westinghouse for modular nuclear reactors. And one of the other things that I think is important in this whole picture was the Alaska summit between Putin and Trump. We don't know fully where Trump is going with this, but part of the discussion, besides Ukraine, was the connection of Russia and the United States, which could include a major infrastructure project such as the Bering Strait Tunnel, which would mean that the US and the Russians could work together in the Arctic. And that would be immensely profitable for both countries. But even more than that, if you connect Russia and the United States through the Bering Strait, you then intersect the whole Chinese land bridge, the high-speed rail system that's now going the north-south corridor, the India or the Pakistan corridor. There's an integration process, which is would be the new normal. And it would be more difficult to break that down with these kinds of usual identity politics, India versus China, Muslim versus Hindu, and so on. So they're losing the leverage that they had, even as they're planning to escalate on all these fronts. And that's why you see such hysteria in the London Economist and the Financial Times and elsewhere, trying to demean this whole idea of a Eurasian century.
Wow. Okay, I want to go back to something that you were saying, Alex. Thank you, Harley. How the British support both sides. So you didn't mention it, but I'm saying it. Zionism is a British project. The British intelligence created the Scoville Bible. The British intelligence, they sponsored and encouraged Wahhabism and that strain of Islam. So you got so they set it all up that Jews, Muslims, and Christians are fighting each other, and then the imperialists, the City of London, and its lackeys can then scoop up the resources. I suspect that the British are also involved in southern Cyprus, working with the Greeks and the Israelis, because you have mentioned how Turkey is increasing its troop presence from 40,000 in North Cyprus to 100,000. That's an omen of something to come. Any more on that?
Well, here's what I know. I know that Israel has upgraded Turkey into their biggest threat, their greatest existential threat. It used to be Iran. Now Iran took the second position, and Turkey is in the forefront. And they are, I think, on an irreversible collision course, because that's the expectation in Israel, and I think that that's partly expectation also in Turkey and in Syria. And I don't know why Cyprus is now being rigged for some kind of destabilization, for a clash, because I think maybe if you detonated something in Cyprus, you would inevitably draw Greece into the conflict, and Greece is already being in the process of arming itself up to their teeth. They are currently spending 3.8% of their GDP on rearmaments, and they're doing it overtly in preparation for. I mean, overtly, this is being talked about openly. In preparation for a clash against Turkey, right? And so it seems like the whole region is being prepared for a major escalation of war, and then also the Balkans are going to be drawn in, because the Turks have some kind of a military cooperation with Albania and with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. So if Turkey went to war against Greece, then Albania might open the next front against Greece from the east, and Macedonia from the north. I don't know that they would be willing to do this, but with enough prodding and enough provocations, it could happen. And then, very bizarrely, Croatia has a military alliance now with Albania and Bulgaria. And that is so bizarre and incomprehensible that, here in Croatia, people are very confused. Like, why would we be in a military alliance with Albania? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Well, it does make sense if you see how these people are planning another major war on the old continent, and the Balkans are always a good powder keg to destabilize and to light up. And so this is all going on. We had Keir Starmer visiting here, I think about a week ago, over the weekend. He spent 2 days in Croatia, supposedly informally, but he met with the prime minister, who is very much stooge of Brussels, and they discussed matters of national security, which, when the Brits come to discuss national security with your government, that's never a good sign. And there are increasing provocations happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Remember, that's where supposedly World War I got triggered when a Serbian nationalist shot Austria-Hungary's Austrian Empire's Prince Franz Ferdinand. And so now you have increasing provocations by Muslims against Croats, by Croats against Muslims, by supposedly Croats against Serbs, and vice versa. And it's all very, very nonsensical. For example, we had an incident where a woman in a burqa, completely covered in black, came to a Croatian village, a town, which is completely 100% Croatian Catholic. And she came to a public place to pray. And somebody was making sure to take a video of this. And then some local person came up to her and she was like, what are you doing here? Go away. And so you didn't hear anything he said, but you saw the video of him coming them and, pointing at her with his hand. And then she picks up her stuff and leaves. And then that's taken by some local Wahhabi organization as a great affront, great insult. And then they decided to organize 100 Muslims to come to that same village to pray collectively. And then it turned out, the Croatian intelligence found out that guy, who is a Wahhabi, like a Bosnian Wahhabi, he's funded from Serbia. So supposedly it was a Serbian provocation against Croats in Bosnia, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't see why the Serbs would ever do such a thing. And then there was at the same time, there was a escalation of violence in Serbia in the protest against the government of President Vučić. Yeah. And then the Serbian intelligence found out that these provocations have been funded from Croatia, which again doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But what we do have is we have these hundreds of NGOs in Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia. And unlike Georgia, remember, they passed a law. If you get more than 25% of your revenues from abroad, you have to declare it, and you have to declare the source of those revenues. So we know if it's coming from, NED, from USAID, from Open Society Institute, and all of these, democracy defenders around the world that we know. Here we don't have that. So, it seems like money is going from Croatia to Serbia to destabilize Serbian regime, and the money is going from Serbia to Bosnia to provoke Croatia. But it's all these NGOs and that are exposing themselves to say like, aha, look, you could draw the line and say like, look, Croatians are provoking the Serbs are provoking the Croatians, the Muslims are provoking, and so this is now a kind of in a slow, the snowball is slowly rolling. So these escalations are multiplying. They're getting bigger and increasingly more serious, and it's very clear that it's being again provoked from abroad. We just don't know because all these NGOs, they don't have to tell us where they get money from and what for.
Wow, thank you, Alex. Harley, any commentary on that? Anything you want to add?
Well, I think Alex is right to point to that region as an explosive tinderbox, because you still have the Israelis carrying out a continuing genocide against the Palestinians. And there may not be as many people being killed today as yesterday, but they're destroying all the infrastructure, all the cities, the hospitals, the schools. So there will be no place for people to go back to. And at the same time, they're talking about pushing them out into Egypt, which Egypt's been on a very tight security alert in recent weeks. The Syrian situation, Israel's involvement in fighting in Syria, and spilling into Iraq, and you still have the Iran situation. So that whole region is a tinderbox, and then you add to it the Balkans, what Alex just described. And it's not a coincidence that the Balkans were the area that was chosen for the battle between the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the Austrian Empire before World War I. So in a sense, we still have these geopolitical doctrines that are shaping at least much of the thinking of the West. And when you read the reports coming out of Brookings and coming out of various think tanks, what they're talking about is not peace and prosperity, but precisely these kinds of areas of clash of civilizations. And that's not a coincidence. That's the intent. And the way that this Anglo-American octopus, the blob, the intelligence operation and the financial integration with finance, the only hope it has to stay in business is through war and creating enemy images in the minds of the people. Now, fortunately, in the U.S., this is somewhat less urgent in the sense that the American people are not clamoring for war with Russia or China. There's a small group that does want a war with China. The support for Israel has collapsed in the United States. Even Trump acknowledged that the other day in an interview. The Jerusalem Post reported that Jerusalem and Israel is losing the American Jewish community, which is its pillar. So there are countervailing trends that are quite explosive. And then you add to that the possibility of a financial crisis, which is, again, Alex, I'm sure you have more on this than I do, but the Financial Times has been running at least 1 or 2 articles a week with people from hedge funds and others saying that they're expecting a dollar collapse or a stock market blowout. Some of that's business as usual, but you add all this volatility, and so you see the urgency of what Putin and Xi were doing in calling out to the global South, let's form an alliance, let's base it on economic security. And I think this is really the most important thing to get out of these conferences. Putin and Xi agree that there's no security from military. Maybe you can destroy the world, but that's not security. Security comes from economic integration and cooperation. And this is what Lyndon LaRouche always talked about, that before you have a political agreement, develop economic ties. Look for potential to have an incentive for peace, through mutual benefit. And to some extent, Trump as a businessman has that as his model. Now, I think he's being misled on the Gaza situation. The fact that Tony Blair was in the White House meeting with Trump last week, given Trump's opposition to everything Blair represented in terms of the Iraq War and everything else, sends out very worrying signals. But I think we've got to make sure people in the West get a clear picture of what's happening in Eurasia and realize it's not an enemy operation, but something that we could work with. And if we have that, then maybe we can overcome the ignorance that's played upon by the establishment.
Harley, perfect. We can do that by sharing this video, these conversations, engaging in these conversations, and not just with you two, but all the other independent commentators who are not in the pay of the globalists or the military and the British intelligence, whoever, but actually are standing and speaking for peace and pointing out the dangerous folly of our overlords. Any last words from either of you before we finish up?
Well, I think we should keep these discussions going because it gives me hope to see that there are people in different parts of the world who are responding to this. And I know Alex is getting all kinds of invitations to podcasts and events. I have also. And I think there's a hunger for a connection between civilizations. And that's the way you defeat Samuel Huntington and Kissinger and Brzezinski and Starmer and the like, by showing that there is a common human interest that's served by prosperity and peace. And there are programs that can realize that. But to talk about it is crucial, and not to be intimidated or suppressed requires a little bit of courage. But I think that's going to be the difference between whether civilization survives or implodes on itself.
Yes, and it will survive. Thank you. And I'm grateful to you both for these conversations. And I look forward to having you both on again. I have the links to Alex and Harley's X accounts and their blogs in the description below. Please share this video far and wide. And let's all stand for peace. Harley, Alex.
Amen.
Good advice.